Autos for everyone. The man who put in a bolt does not put on the nut. The man who puts on the nut does not tighten it. Every piece of work in the shop moves. It may move on hooks, on overhead chains, it may travel on a moving platform, or it may go by gravity. But the point is that there is no lifting or trucking. No workman has anything to do with moving or lifting anything. So said Henry Ford in 1913 of his new method of producing automobiles. Unfinished cars were hung on hooks attached to moving belts. Workers stood in one place and did not need to move. Only the cars did. Each worker did one job and one job only before the car moved on to the next worker in line. Ford got this idea from watching the methods of the meatpacking industry in Chicago. Ford used this method to produce many millions of cars quickly and cheaply. A modern miracle. Autos for everyone. The man who puts in a bolt does not put it on the nut. The man who puts on the nut does not tighten it. Every piece of work in the shop moves. It may move on hooks, on overhead chains. It may travel on a moving platform, or it may go by gravity. But the point is that there is no lifting or trucking. No workman has anything to do with moving or lifting anything. So said Henry Ford in 1913 of his new method of producing automobiles. Unfinished cars were hung on hooks attached to moving belts. Workers stood in one place and did not need to move. Only the cars did. Each worker did one job and one job only before the car moved on to the next worker in line. Ford got this idea from watching the methods of the meatpacking industry in Chicago. Ford used this method to produce many millions of cars quickly and cheaply. A modern miracle. In the last years of the 1800s, the automobile companies grew up in the Midwest. The many investors and bold businessmen leaders there led the way. The Midwest's supply of iron and steel helped the young industry grow. The excellent railroad and water transportation system also helped. In 1896, a man from Lansing, Michigan, named Ransom Olds built one of the first cars in the United States. Olds Car Company marked the beginning of the auto industry in this country. The cars built by Olds cost over $1,000. This was more money than most people made in a year. Few people could afford them. Then Henry Ford in Detroit tried to build a cheaper, better car. His Model T of 1908 was easy to drive and simple to fix. Everybody wanted to buy one, but Ford could not sell the Model T for less than $850. He wanted to find a way to produce cars more cheaply. To solve the problem, Ford thought of using assembly lines. At the beginning of this lesson, you read how this system worked. In an assembly line, unfinished cars travel on a moving belt past workers and machines. Each worker or machine does a certain task. Using assembly lines, Ford lowered the cost of making a car. By 1914, the Model T cost $490. 2 years later, the price fell to $360. Between 1908 to 1927, Ford sold millions of Model Ts. A nation takes to the road. As more people started driving cars, life in the United States began to change. A farm family from Iowa used to travel many hours by horse and carriage to reach the nearest town. A trip that had taken 3 hours by horse now took only 1 hour by car. Life on the streets of cities such as St. Louis, Missouri, became more lively. Automobiles, trolley cars, and buses made it possible for workers to live farther from their jobs. Shopping, visiting, and vacationing became easier for people. At the same time, trucks joined trains as an important way to ship goods. A closer look. A car assembly line. Using assembly lines in manufacturing helps factories produce goods quickly and cheaply. Most cars are built on assembly lines. Workers assemble cars step by step by adding parts as the car moves from one workstation to the next. Workers on the line today still do one job, but there are about 1,800 jobs to do, so robots help. Robotic arms run by computers can weld parts together and even paint the cars. Henry Ford introduced the moving assembly line to his car factory in 1913. By 1914, he had cut the time it took to build the steel frame for the Model T from 12 and a half hours to 1.5 hours. The automobile industry needed a great number of workers for its factories. European immigrants and blacks from the Southeast provided much of this labor. They streamed into busy Midwestern automobile centers such as Detroit, Michigan, and Cleveland, Ohio. During World War II, automobile companies made tanks, bomber planes, and other war supplies for the United States government. Many men left the car factories and went off to fight in the war. Automakers hired women to work on the assembly lines to take the place of the men. To learn more about a modern assembly line, see a closer look at a car assembly line below. Since the 1970s, the foreign car companies have been selling more and more cars in the United States. As a result, car manufacturers in the United States have sold fewer cars and have had to close plants. Today, Japan leads the world in the production of cars, trucks, and buses. Many people now work in car factories that the Japanese have opened in cities in the Midwest. As you have seen, inventions like the steel plow and the reaper brought many changes to farming in the Midwest. Changes in the region continued as people developed the refrigerated railroad car and Model T. Life in the Midwest and the United States would never be the same. Review questions. Number 1. Focus. How did the Midwest develop as the center for the nation's automobile industry? Number 2. Connect. Look at the map that shows resources and manufacturing on page 184. Are automobile factories near the region's main steelmaking areas or far from them? What is the reason for this? Economics. Why did Henry Ford want to produce cars more cheaply? Number 4. Critical thinking. What effect do you think the growing numbers of cars and trucks might have had on the railroads? Explain your answer. Number 5. Activity. Make a list of Midwestern states that manufacture transportation equipment. Use the Minipedia to help you.